So we've already looked together at curriculum evaluation. In this short session, we're going to look at the idea of curriculum monitoring and how that's different from the evaluation process. So if you remember, in our curriculum evaluation session, we looked at the idea that there might be 5 core questions that could drive the design of our curriculum evaluation plan. When we think about a monitoring process, we're going to zero in on just 2 of those 5 questions. Are the students achieving the desired learning outcomes? And to what extent is the curriculum being implemented as planned? The other questions from the evaluation process will only be used if our monitoring process suggests that there's something perhaps that we want to investigate a little bit further. Because the purpose of monitoring is really just to get a sense of whether the curriculum is healthy enough to leave it alone until the next time it comes up for a full evaluation, or whether perhaps there's something that we need to look at and do a bit of triage in the meantime. Because it's meant to be a process that's easy to manage, it's not only the questions that we're going to narrow down, we're also going to drastically reduce the amount of data we collect. And for that, shrewd, clever sampling is going to be key to avoiding overloading our teams with collecting a whole bunch of data that we will never be able to use. So we're going to use Martin Jason's generic process again, but we're going to tweak it a little bit around the idea of monitoring. So first we'll decide on the area to be monitored and describe that area very, very briefly. For the model that I'm about to share with you, we're going to look at the idea of monitoring how healthy our cross-curricular research skills curriculum is. So let's have a look at how we might design some monitoring questions for this process. So once again, remember, we only have 2 core questions that we're looking at in the monitoring process: student achievement and the extent of implementation. So how do we take that idea, the extent of implementation and the student achievement, and turn it into some specific questions that will relate to our monitoring of our cross-curricular research skills? For implementation, we might ask ourselves, well, okay, if the curriculum is going to be implemented effectively, then there are going to be opportunities for kids to learn all of these skills, and there are going to be opportunities for the kids to demonstrate each of these skills. And these will be embedded in the units in our school, so we'll look into those units to make sure that these opportunities are there. And then for student outcomes, we're just going to be asking ourselves, well, are students achieving these particular standards, these particular skills at an appropriate level? So let's take these questions and think about how we're going to narrow down the data now to make it a reasonable data sample that's going to be manageable. Yeah? So for the opportunities to learn the research skills, we're going to want to look to see that the skills are actually listed and included in our units, and we might do a full check through whatever curriculum mapping software we use that those are included. But then we want to see that there are learning experiences that we consider to be at least potentially effective opportunities for students to learn those. So we might collect a sample of unit planners, perhaps 2 per grade level from science and social studies in the lower school, and perhaps 2 per subject per year from all the subjects we consider to be relevant in the middle and high school. And we need a way to analyze that data once we've collected these unit plans. So perhaps what we do after we've mapped the skills, perhaps we create a rubric for an effective learning experience, an experience that we consider would actually give an effective opportunity for students to learn these particular skills, or these types of skills. We decide a cutoff score on that rubric, and we simply record the percentage of units which meet that cutoff score. For the opportunities to demonstrate, we'd do something very similar, but we wouldn't be looking at learning experiences. We'd be looking at assessment tasks. We'd pull the same sample of units, and in this case, we'd create a rubric that we considered would be an effective opportunity for students to demonstrate this skill set, and decide our cutoff score and collect that percentage again. In terms of our third question for student achievement, we might monitor simply the scores on some common assessment tasks. So we might pick a sample of assessment tasks which were done commonly, maybe one in social studies from grade 2, 5, and 8, one in science from grade 3, 6, and 9. And then we'd create a scoring rubric to include those standards. We'd record the percentages of students achieving at each level on the rubric, and we'd decide what we consider to be acceptable percentages of students at each of those levels. So we may want to also include the idea that we are hoping that our students will maintain the skills they learned in earlier grades. So perhaps the rubrics we use for our upper grades in this exercise include not only the skills that were taught in that particular unit, but skills from lower down as well, so that we can monitor that. And as we're using this monitoring strategy over a number of years, we may want to vary the grade levels or the units or the subject areas which we're collecting unit planners from, so that we can get an ongoing sense of the health of the embeddedness of this curriculum and this set of skills and the level to which students are achieving. So let's just quickly summarize what the difference between an evaluation process and a monitoring process is. An evaluation process requires a full set of questions once we've decided the type of evaluation. Remember, there were 3 types of evaluation. Monitoring process is only going to be using the impact questions, and we're going to take a much smaller set of questions even beneath those 2 core impact questions. As well as reducing the number of questions we're going to ask, we're going to take a much smaller data sample. We're going to be just sampling a very manageable sample of evidence. And instead of a full written report, we're just going to make a decision. Does something need further investigation? Yes, no, and maybe document enough just to justify that decision. Only from a leadership perspective, we've got to remember that monitoring can be quite threatening. And perhaps our human resources frame can help us think through a little bit how to minimize that. So remember our human resources questions that we have here about support and training, about feedback, about relationships and group dynamics, about norms and processes that can maximize what we want and minimize negative outcomes, and about the importance of helping everybody understand what the potential benefits are for each individual, for them, what they get out of the process, and not just what the organization does. When you do the exercise attached to the practice exercise attached to this idea of monitoring, you can go through any or all of the questions from this frame. Right now, I'm just going to pick up one as a model. So if we think about the potential benefits for the individual, if we have created these rubrics for effective learning experiences and rubrics for effective opportunities to demonstrate these skills, then teachers could use those to self-evaluate as well, and teams could use those to self-evaluate. So we might want to actually include some self-evaluation in this whole process, and include some conversations between the reviewers and the teams. This could become quite a really beneficial feedback process for everybody involved if we use it right. Of course, we'll have to remember that the actual data about any particular unit plan would only ever go to that individual or that team, but that's kind of just, of course, right? So now's your chance to design your own. If you go to practice exercise 4 is about using what we've learned in this short video to design your own monitoring process. So off you go.